A 10-year-old girl, a bomb underneath a crime lord's car. 20 minutes to stop it. And nobody would listen. If you want to know what happens when the most feared man in Chicago owes his life to a child everyone ignored, stay until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. But the flowers were starting to die. Amara noticed it the way she noticed most things. Quietly, without making a sound about it, the way her grandmother had taught her. The pink carnations in the left bucket had gone soft at the edges, petals curling inward like they were trying to protect something that was already gone. She'd bought them 3 days ago from Mr. Delacroix's stall on Maxwell Street, paying 60 cents a bunch because he liked her, and because her grandmother had known his wife before the stroke. Now they were wilting in the October cold, and nobody had bought a single one since noon. She adjusted the cardboard sign taped to the front of the bucket. Fresh flowers. $3 per bunch. The tape was starting to peel from the cold, same as everything else on this block. The Hansong Grand Hotel rose behind her like something that belonged in a different city. 42 floors of glass and steel and a lobby you could see from the sidewalk. All pale marble and gold fixtures and men in suits who never looked down. She'd been selling flowers outside it for 11 months, since the summer after her mother died, and in all that time exactly one person who worked inside had ever spoken to her directly. That was Hector, the older doorman with the white mustache and the bad knee, who sometimes slipped her a granola bar when the managers weren't watching. Tonight, Hector wasn't on the door. Two men she'd never seen before stood at the entrance in hotel uniforms that didn't quite fit right, too stiff across the shoulders, too new. She'd noticed them when she arrived at 4:30. By 5 o'clock, she'd decided something was wrong with them, though she couldn't have said why exactly. It was something in how they stood, like men pretending to wait, rather than men who were used to it. The wind off the lake cut through her jacket. It was a good jacket, olive green, hooded, her mother's favorite color, but it was 2 years old and a size too small now, and the zipper stuck at the bottom if you weren't careful. She worked it up with 2 fingers without looking down. Habit. She sold 1 bunch of white daisies to a woman in heels who didn't make eye contact and dropped a 5 without waiting for change. She sold nothing else for the next 40 minutes. At 5:15, a black SUV pulled up to the curb ahead of the hotel's main entrance and 2 men in dark coats climbed out. They swept the sidewalk with their eyes in a way she'd seen before, the way men looked at a room before the important man walked into it. One spoke into his collar. The other positioned himself near the ornamental concrete pillar to her left. The important man was coming. She knew who it was without needing to be told. 11 months of standing on this sidewalk had taught her the rhythms of this hotel, the way a musician learns a song. Which car meant which arrival, which cluster of suits meant what kind of meeting, which tension in the doormen's shoulders meant trouble versus ceremony. Kang Tae-hyun arrived on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always between 5:30 and 6, always in the armored Mercedes that idled in the hotel's underground garage until 20 minutes before his exit. She'd never been close to him. Nobody on the sidewalk got close, but she'd seen him enough to know his shape, the height, the way he moved like the sidewalk owed him something, the absolute absence of warmth in his expression. She'd been afraid of him the first few times. She wasn't anymore. Fear, she'd learned, was a thing that wore down if you had enough other things to be afraid of. Her grandmother's cough, the electric bill, the carnations dying before she could sell them. At 5:19, the 2 men near the hotel entrance shifted positions, and that was when she heard the voices. She almost missed it. There was a silver sedan parked at the curb 30 feet from where she stood, and 2 of the uniformed men, the fake ones, the stiff-shouldered ones she'd been watching, had drifted toward it and stood with their backs to the street. They were speaking low and fast, in Russian. The language hit her the way it always did, first as sound, then as structure, then as meaning, all 3 arriving in a cascade that happened before she consciously decided to listen. Her mother had spoken Russian the way most people breathe, without thinking about it, in the middle of other sentences, switching mid-thought when the right word only existed in one language and not the other. Amara had grown up inside that sound. She'd lost a lot since her mother died, but she hadn't lost that. She turned her head away from them and kept her hands on the flower buckets and listened. The first man said, "It's in position. Under the driver's seat, left side, behind the bracket." The second said, "Confirmation from Victor?" First man, 20 minutes ago. It's live. A pause. Traffic noise. A bus hissing past. Second man. What about the secondary? First man. Korlov and Demir are across the street. Third floor, northeast corner. If the device fails, they don't. The second man said something she didn't catch. The bus was too loud. Then, 6 o'clock. He always goes to the car at 6. She stopped hearing the rest. Her ears were still working. The sounds were still entering her skull. But the processing had frozen somewhere between input and meaning, because what she had just heard was not the kind of thing 10-year-old girls heard standing next to buckets of dying flowers outside hotels in the early evening. It was the kind of thing that existed in movies, in the stories her grandmother warned her away from. In the news broadcasts they watched on the 12-inch TV with the antenna that needed repositioning every 15 minutes. Bomb. Under the driver's seat. 6 o'clock. She looked at her phone. Her grandmother's old Samsung, screen cracked down to the left side, battery at 31%. 5:21. 39 minutes. She looked at the Mercedes in the hotel's circular driveway. Black, armored, engine off, driver's door shut. She looked at the two Russian-speaking men who had drifted back toward their positions, separated again, faces neutral and professional. She thought about her mother, which she didn't let herself do very often anymore because it didn't help. She thought about her grandmother, who was home right now watching her program, and probably didn't realize the electric bill was 2 weeks overdue. She thought about the flower buckets she would have to carry home on the bus if it got too cold and nobody bought anything. Then she thought, somebody is going to die in 38 minutes, and I might be the only person who knows. She picked up the bucket, just the carnations, the ones that were already going, and walked toward the hotel entrance. The two men in the stiff uniforms tracked her without turning their heads. She felt it the way you feel someone watching you from behind. She kept her face aimed at the door and tried to look like someone who had a reason to be going inside. The real doorman stopped her. "No vendors," said the younger one, stepping forward. He was maybe 25, Chicago accent broad in the chest. "You can't bring merchandise inside. I need to talk to somebody." She heard how young she sounded and hated it. "It's important. You can't be in here. There's something wrong with the car. Mr. Kang's car. I heard. You need to step back from the entrance." His voice had shifted, gone professional and flat. "I'll call someone to help you find your guardian." "I don't have a guardian here. There's a bomb." She said the word too loud. She knew it the moment it came out. The young doorman's face did something complicated, alarm and dismissal fighting each other, and then dismissal won. "Step back from the entrance, miss." "I'm serious, step back." He was already reaching for his radio. She stepped back. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed and thought hard and fast. The bucket of carnations hung from her right hand, petals still curling inward, dying quietly. The two fake security men were watching her now, without pretending not to. She had 36 minutes. She walked around the side of the building to the loading dock entrance, where the kitchen staff came out to smoke. She'd talked to some of them before, not often, but enough to know faces. A heavy-set man in a white coat was standing there with a cigarette, looking at his phone. "Excuse me." She climbed the 2 concrete steps to get closer to him. "I need you to tell somebody inside that there's a problem with Mr. Kang's car." He looked up from his phone, looked at her, looked back at his phone. "Kid, I do prep work. I don't know anything about cars. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to tell somebody who works security that there might be something wrong. That's it." "How do you know something's wrong with the car?" She couldn't say I heard 2 men speaking Russian. She knew how that sounded. I heard some people talking outside about Mr. Kang's car." The man took a long drag from his cigarette. "You selling flowers out front?" "Yes." "Then you need to go back out front and sell flowers. You don't want to get involved in anything to do with the people in this building." He wasn't wrong. She knew he wasn't wrong. And yet, can you just tell someone? Just mention it to someone inside? He dropped the cigarette, stepped on it, and went back through the door without answering. She stood on the loading dock steps and pressed her palms against her thighs, hard, and tried to think. 33 minutes. She went back to the front, called 911 from her cracked screen Samsung. The dispatcher was professional and patient and didn't hang up on her, which she appreciated. She explained what she had heard as clearly as she could. 2 men, Russian language, bomb under the driver's seat of the black Mercedes in the hotel driveway, 6 o'clock. She gave the hotel address. There was a pause. "Can I get your name, sweetheart?" She almost winced at the word. "Amara Brooks." And how old are you, Amara? She knew why they were asking. She told them anyway. 10. Another pause. She could hear the dispatchers breathing, the background noise of the call center, something being typed. Amara, I'm going to need you to stay on the line. Is there an adult with you? No. I'm going to send someone to check on you, okay? Can you... There isn't time to check on me. There's a bomb in that car. Someone needs to look at the car. We're going to take care of everything, Amara. Can you move away from the hotel entrance? She hung up. She wasn't proud of it. But she knew what we're going to take care of everything meant when it came from someone who was treating her like a lost child rather than a source of information. It meant they would send a patrol unit in 20 minutes to look for a distressed minor, and by the time anyone opened the hood of that Mercedes, Kang Tae-hyun would already be climbing into the back seat. 29 minutes. She walked back to her flower buckets, moved them 6 feet to the left, closer to the hotel driveway, set up as close to the path the car would take as she could without triggering the security men. She sold a bunch of yellow freesias to a couple who were arguing quietly about something and didn't notice her face at all. She sold nothing else. At 5:40, she approached one of Tae-hyun's actual bodyguards, the real ones, who had arrived with the advance team and stationed themselves near the entrance. He was Korean, late 20s, with the kind of stillness that came from practice rather than calm. Sir? She stood directly in front of him. I need to tell you something about Mr. Kang's car. He looked at her the way people looked at things they'd already categorized. Move along. There's a device underneath the driver's seat. I heard 2 men talking about it 20 minutes ago. They said 6 o'clock. That's 20 minutes from now. Something moved across his face. Quick. Gone. Who told you that? I heard it. I speak Russian. 2 of the hotel's security men, the ones who aren't usually here, the ones in the stiff uniforms, they were talking by the silver sedan. They mentioned Victor. They said there are also 2 men in the building across the street with guns. The bodyguard's eyes moved to the building across the street, just for a second, then back to her. You're a flower seller. Yes. How old are you? She was very tired of that question. Does that change what I'm telling you? He stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, Stay here, and moved away with his phone already at his ear. She stayed. She watched him make the call. Watched his face, which told her nothing. Watched him look at her twice while he spoke. Brief, assessing looks. And then end the call and speak to one of the other men in a low, fast murmur. The other man's eyes went to the Mercedes. She exhaled. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was enough. At 5:52, the hotel doors opened. Not Kang Tae-hyun. A cluster of businessmen in suits, talking over each other about something that sounded like quarterly earnings. They piled into a waiting car and left. The bodyguard who'd spoken to her was no longer near the entrance. She looked at her phone. 8 minutes. The Mercedes was still in the driveway. Still dark, still silent. No bomb technicians, no police. No one had moved it. Something had gone wrong with the message. Or the message hadn't been passed up far enough. Or it had been passed up and dismissed as the noise of a 10-year-old flower seller who'd heard something she hadn't understood. 7 minutes. She thought about walking away. She thought about it in the specific, concrete way you think about things that are genuinely possible. Picking up her buckets, rolling them to the bus stop on Michigan Avenue, going home to her grandmother and the cracked TV screen and the electric bill. Nobody could blame her. She'd tried. She'd called 911. She'd talked to the bodyguard. She'd told the kitchen worker. She had done more than anyone could reasonably expect from a 10-year-old girl standing on a sidewalk in the cold. She picked up the daisies, the freshest ones, the ones that still looked like something, and stood at the edge of the driveway entrance and waited. At 5:57, Kang Tae-hyun came through the hotel doors. She had seen him at a distance before. Up close, he was different, taller than he looked from across the street. Sharper. The suit was dark charcoal and sat on him with the easy precision of something very expensive, and he moved through his own security detail the way water moves around stones, not past them so much as through them, the formation adjusting to him automatically. His face was closed in a way that went beyond professional. It was the face of someone who had spent a long time not letting things land on him. His eyes swept the entrance and the driveway and registered nothing unusual, which meant the bodyguard had said nothing or had been dismissed or had been part of it. She didn't know which and didn't have time to figure it out. He was walking toward the car. She moved into the driveway. 2 bodyguards stepped in front of her immediately, a wall of suit and shoulder, and she planted her feet and didn't step back and said, loudly, In the clearest voice she had, "Mr. Kang, there's a bomb in your car." One of the bodyguards reached for her arm. Taehyun stopped. Not the way a person stops when they're startled. The way a person stops when something has triggered a calculation. He looked at her over the shoulder of the bodyguard between them. Really looked, which was not something he did casually. And she looked back and didn't let herself look away. "Let her speak," he said. His voice was quiet and flat, and the bodyguard released her arm immediately. She held out the flowers, absurdly. She didn't know why. Then she lowered them and said, "There are 2 men in hotel security uniforms. They spoke Russian. They said there's a device under the driver's seat, behind the bracket on the left side. They said it goes off at 6. They also said there are 2 shooters in the building across the street, 3rd floor, northeast corner, in case the bomb doesn't work." Silence. The bodyguard nearest Taehyun said something low in Korean. Taehyun didn't respond to him. He kept his eyes on her. "You speak Russian?" "Yes." "How old are you?" She breathed out through her nose. 10. Something changed in his face. Not softening. That wasn't the right word. Something more like adjustment. A recalibration. "How long have you been standing outside this hotel?" 11 months. "Selling flowers?" "Yes." He looked at the Mercedes, then back at her. "Their names, the men you heard. They mentioned Victor. One of the other ones, they said Korlov and Damir were across the street." The bodyguard nearest him went very still. Taehyun reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, for a phone, and said 3 words in Korean. Then he looked at her again and said, "Step away from the vehicle. Both directions, all the way to the sidewalk, now." He was already moving, already turning, already talking into the phone. 2 of his men moved to the Mercedes and crouched beside it without touching it. More were speaking into collars, voices low and fast. The 2 fake security men near the entrance had already registered the shift, and she could see them. The nearer one's body language had changed, a micro-tension in the shoulders, the beginning of a decision. She had set something in motion. She stood on the sidewalk with her bucket of daisies and watched downtown Chicago begin to come undone. And somewhere behind the wall of organized motion, she heard the first siren in the distance. A thin, rising note moving fast through the evening traffic. Still blocks away, but coming, definitely coming. And across the driveway, through the controlled chaos of men repositioning, she caught Kang Tae-hyun's gaze one more time before his security closed around him. He was still looking at her, not the way adults looked at children they'd underestimated. The way a man looked at something that had just reordered his understanding of the world and hadn't yet decided what to do with that. Then his wall of security folded around him and he was gone, and the sirens got louder, and one of the fake security men broke from his position and ran. And nobody except Amara saw the second one, the one who hadn't run, the one who had stayed, reach slowly into his jacket. The second man's hand was still inside his jacket. Amara saw it from the sidewalk. The way the fabric pulled tight at the shoulder, the way his elbow angled out, the way his feet shifted to a wider stance like he was preparing for the recoil of something. Everyone else was watching the fake security guard who'd run. The bodyguards were splitting their attention between Tae-hyun's position and the direction of the fleeing man. The 2 bomb technicians who'd arrived in the first patrol car were moving toward the Mercedes in a crouch. Nobody was watching the second man. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He pulled his hand free of the jacket, and it was a phone, just a phone, a black rectangle that he looked at for half a second before his face went through something she couldn't read, and he shoved it back into his pocket and walked, quickly, not running, toward the alley that ran alongside the hotel's east face. Her breath came out all at once. Her knees were not entirely steady. She set the daisy bucket down on the sidewalk and sat on the concrete curb next to it, because her legs had decided they were done pretending, and she pressed both palms flat against the cold stone and breathed. Around her, downtown Chicago kept going. Sirens louder now, 2 distinct pitches, converging. A patrol car had mounted the curb half a block north, lights strobing blue-white against the hotel's glass face. People on the sidewalk had stopped walking and started filming. A woman in a red coat was asking someone next to her what was happening. A man with a briefcase was backing away from the driveway entrance. Amara sat on the curb and watched the bomb technicians work on the Mercedes and waited for someone to tell her what to do next. Nobody came. She wasn't surprised. After 11 months on this sidewalk, she understood her position in the ecosystem of this hotel with the clarity of long observation. She was furniture. Useful furniture, briefly, but furniture. The machinery of consequence had taken her information and ingested it, and was now running on its own momentum, and the small girl who had provided the initial spark was no longer a required component. She picked up her phone. Battery at 19%. She called her grandmother. 4 rings. 5. Nana, it's me. I'm okay. Pause. No, I'm still outside the hotel. There was something... It doesn't matter. I'm okay. I'll be late. Don't wait up. Another pause. Longer. I know, Nana. I love you too. She hung up and looked at her flowers. The daisies were fine. The carnations were dead. Inside the Hanseong Grand's back security office, a room most guests didn't know existed, behind the fitness center on the second floor, accessible only by a coded door that looked like a service entrance, Kang Tae-hyun stood at a table with 4 men and said nothing for a very long time. The room was small, industrial, fluorescent. It smelled of recycled air and old coffee and the specific kind of tension that gathers in enclosed spaces when powerful men have made errors they haven't yet admitted to. A bank of monitors covered the right wall, feeds cycling through the hotel's 42 floors and all 6 exterior angles. Someone had frozen the feed on the driveway at 5:58. The image showed the Mercedes, the 2 bomb technicians. And in the lower left corner, small and slightly blurred, a girl in an olive jacket sitting on the curb. Tae-hyun looked at it for a long time. Victor, he said finally. Sung-jin, his head of actual security, not the infiltrated outer layer, the actual inner circle. The men who'd been with him since Seoul said, "We don't have him yet." "But you know where he is." A pause. "We have a location. It's not confirmed." Tae-hyun turned from the monitor. "It's confirmed. Victor doesn't go anywhere we don't know about. That's the entire point of Victor." He said the name like something that had gone bad in his mouth. "What about Korlov and Demir?" "3rd floor northeast corner of the building across the street, like she said. Both in custody. One of them had a compound fracture in his wrist by the time the officers reached them. Apparently he decided to contest the arrest." "And the device?" Sung-jin's jaw moved. "Live, military-grade remote detonator 2-stage. If you'd gotten into the car..." He stopped. "Finish the sentence." "It would have taken out the car and everything within a 15-foot radius." The other men in the room were very still. Tae-hyun moved to the window, small, frosted, overlooking the service alley, and stood with his back to the room. How long had Victor been planning this? It wasn't a question. Sung-jin answered it anyway. "The device was military surplus from 2 sources we've now traced to a procurement channel that Victor oversaw, which means, minimum, 8 months. 8 months. Victor had sat across from him at that table in the Gold Coast house for 8 months, attending briefings and receiving assignments and eating food from Tae-hyun's kitchen, and for every single one of those months he had been building toward this moment. Tae-hyun turned this knowledge over in his mind, the way you turn a stone that you know has something living under it, not ready to lift it fully but unable to leave it alone. "Who ordered it?" he said. "The Vanek organization? Out of Milwaukee. Victor had been turned, we think, approximately 14 months ago." 14, he said the number quietly. "Yes." "So the contract on the Lyndhurst distribution was also..." "We're reviewing that now." Tae-hyun said nothing. He stood at the frosted window and looked at the distorted shape of the service alley and did the math of 14 months of poisoned intelligence, and the sum was something he was not prepared to calculate fully in a room with other men watching his face. "The girl," he said. Sung-jin shifted. "Chicago PD wants to take her statement. She's still outside." "I know she's still outside. I can see her on the monitor." He turned. "Who is she?" "We don't..." "Find out. Before she leaves this sidewalk, I want to know her name, where she lives, who her family is, and how long she's been standing outside my hotel without anyone noticing she was there." Sung-jin looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. The kind of look that passed between men who had known each other long enough that a glance could carry full sentences. Then, "Yes." The police officer who came to take Amara's statement was young, with a thin beard that looked like he was still deciding whether to commit to it, and he crouched down to her level on the sidewalk in the way adults did when they were trying to seem less threatening and mostly succeeded in seeming patronizing instead. His name was Officer Reyes, and he was not unkind. Can you walk me through what you heard, in your own words? She had already walked 2 other people through it. She did it again. The Russian words, the position, the timing, the names. She was precise because precision mattered and because her mother had taught her that vague answers were the enemy of being believed. Reyes wrote things down, nodded, looked up. You said Victor. Do you have a last name? No, they just said Victor. The other man said confirmation from Victor. That means Victor was the one who authorized it, not the one planting it. Reyes stopped writing for a second, looked at her, started writing again. How do you know Russian? My mother taught me. Is your mother? She died last year. A beat. I'm sorry. He meant it, she could tell. Is there a parent or guardian we can contact? You said you called your grandmother? She's at home. She has a bad hip. She can't get here. We may need to have her come in for... She doesn't drive and the bus takes 40 minutes. Amara looked at him steadily. I'm telling you everything I heard. I already told 2 of your colleagues. I called 911 at 5:22. If you want to verify that, my number is... She recited it. Reyes looked at her with an expression she recognized. It was the expression adults got when a child said something that landed outside the frame they'd prepared for. You called before any of the security personnel reacted. Yes. You told the hotel's security. I told a doorman who dismissed me, a kitchen worker who ignored me, and one of Mr. Kang's actual bodyguards who apparently passed the message up through channels that did not reach him in time. That's why I had to approach Mr. Kang directly. Right. Reyes wrote something, stopped, looked at what he'd written like he was reading it for the first time. Amara, you understand that what you did tonight. Is there anything else you need from me? My phone's at 12%. He blinked. We'll want a formal statement at the precinct, with your grandmother present. Okay. Can I arrange a ride for you, to get home tonight? She looked at her flower buckets, 2 full ones and the dead carnations. Can the ride fit my inventory? He stared at her for a second. Then something in his face broke slightly and he said, Yeah, I think we can manage that. What? They managed it. A patrol car with a large trunk and a sergeant who said nothing. The entire drive took her home to the 2-bedroom on South Wentworth, with the cracked front step and the window unit that rattled in the wind. Her grandmother met her at the door. Agnes Brooks, 71, 4'11", with the posture of a woman who had refused to be diminished by 80 years of reasons to try, and looked at the police car and then at Amara and said, Child, what have you done? Nothing bad. Amara set the flower buckets in the entryway. I helped someone. Agnes looked at the police officer who was carrying the second bucket up the front steps. Ma'am? He nodded. Agnes looked at her granddaughter. I'll explain everything inside, Amara said. She didn't sleep until after 2. Not because she was afraid. Fear, again, was a resource she'd been running lean on for long enough that it didn't spike the way it probably should have. She lay in her bed in the narrow room with the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a running dog and stared at it, and ran the evening backward and forward in her mind the way you debug something, checking for errors. The thing that stuck was the man who hadn't run, the one with his hand in his jacket. He'd walked into the alley. The police had been focused on the one who'd fled east, and Taehyun's men had been focused on securing their principal, and nobody had gone into the alley after the second man. She'd told Officer Reyes about him. He'd written it down. She didn't know what that meant in terms of action. She turned onto her side and looked at the crack in the wall above the baseboard. She thought about Victor, whoever he was, the man whose name she'd pulled from a conversation that wasn't meant for her. Sung Jin, Taehyun's head of security, was at that moment sitting in a room somewhere trying to locate him, and Victor, who had spent 14 months building toward tonight, now knew that tonight had failed. Men who built things for 14 months didn't stop when the thing failed. She didn't know why she was thinking about this. It wasn't her problem. She had no connection to Kang Taehyun beyond 11 months of sidewalk proximity and one very strange evening. She had done what she could do, and it had worked, and it was over. She closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She stared at it. At midnight, on a Tuesday, with 12, now 11% battery. She answered, Ms. Brooks. A man's voice. Korean accent. Slight. Careful. I apologize for the hour. My name is Sung Jin Park. I work for Mr. Kang. A pause. He would like to speak with you. She sat up. Now? Tomorrow morning, if possible. He understands this is an unusual request and that you have no obligation to agree. Is he going to ask me questions or tell me things? A beat. I believe it will be both. Is he angry? Another beat. Longer. No. She looked at the water stain on the ceiling. The running dog. 9 o'clock, she said. I have to be back by 11 to buy flowers for the afternoon. A pause that she couldn't read. 9 o'clock. A car will come to your address. She almost asked how he had her address. Then she remembered the way Tae-hyun had looked at the monitor with her image frozen in the corner and decided she already knew the answer to that. Okay, she said, and hung up and lay back down. Yeah. She was there at 9 exactly, not the hotel. A building on the near north side, glass and stone, residential above and private below, the kind of building that didn't have a sign and didn't need one. The car that collected her was black and clean and driven by a man who introduced himself as James and spoke only twice the entire ride, once to confirm her name when he arrived, and once to say they'd arrived. Her grandmother had made her wear the good coat, the navy one with the actual functioning zipper, and had stood in the doorway watching the car until it turned the corner. Sungjin met her in a lobby that looked like the idea of a lobby rather than a real one. Too clean, no mail slot, no building directory. He was shorter than she'd expected from the voice, with the build of a man who had once been lean and had added density over the years in the specific way that had nothing to do with softness. He looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said he wanted to talk." "He does." He gestured toward the elevator. "He's upstairs." The elevator was small and fast and said nothing. Sungjin stood with his hands clasped in front of him and looked at the door. She looked at the door. On the 4th floor it opened directly into a room. Not a hallway, a room, that was large and sparse and had windows on 2 sides, and a table in the middle with 2 chairs and a coffee tray, and a man already standing at the window with his back to the room. Tae-hyun turned when she came in. In the daylight, and without the adrenaline of the previous evening rearranging her perceptions, he looked different again, less like a force of nature, more like a man who was tired in a way that sleep hadn't fixed in a long time. There were lines around his eyes she hadn't seen the night before. He was in a different suit, darker, quieter, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he watched her cross the room with an expression that she still couldn't fully read, but that had less of the calculated assessment of last night and more of something she recognized from her grandmother's face sometimes, something that looked like it was measuring a debt. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. She sat. He remained standing. "You called 911 at 5:22, he said. "Yes." The call was logged and assigned low priority. A unit was dispatched at 5:58. She said nothing. "You spoke to one of my outer security staff at 5:40. He passed the message to his immediate supervisor, who was one of Victor's men. The message was suppressed." She absorbed that. "So even if I hadn't come to you directly, you were the only working link in the chain." He said it flatly, without drama. "Every other path was either blocked or inadequate. If you had walked away at any point before 5:57, I would be dead." She looked at the coffee tray. There was a cup in front of her. Real coffee, the actual kind, not the brown water from the gas station near her building. She hadn't taken it yet. "Okay," she said. He pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. This seemed to cost him something, in a way she couldn't precisely identify. Like he was more comfortable standing. "I want to understand why you didn't walk away," he said. She looked at him. "Is that a serious question?" "Yes." She picked up the coffee cup and held it in both hands. Warm. "Because someone was going to die." "People die in this city every day." "Not in front of me." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't know me," he said. "I knew you were a person." He looked at her with that expression again, the debt measuring one. Then he looked at the table, then back at her. "Viktor Mikhailov was taken into custody at 4 this morning," he said, "in a building in Evanston. He will not be a problem." He said the last sentence in a way that made it very clear the word custody was doing significant work. "The man who went into the alley," she said. His eyes sharpened. "You saw him." He had his hand in his jacket. Everyone was looking at the one who ran. He walked into the east alley. Taehyun looked at Sung-jin, who was standing near the elevator with the stillness of a man who had learned to be present without being intrusive. Something passed between them in a look. "His name is Petrov," Taehyun said. "He is not yet in custody." "Oh." "He is being located." She nodded. Then, because she was tired and the coffee was good, and the morning had already been too many things, "Is that why you wanted to talk to me? To find out what else I saw?" Taehyun looked at her for a long time before he answered. "No," he said. He reached into his jacket. She watched his hand, a reflex from last night, and placed a white envelope on the table. Then he placed a second one beside it. "The first is to cover the cost of any flower inventory you weren't able to sell last night," he said. "The second is—" He stopped, chose the next words carefully, in a way that seemed slightly unfamiliar to him, like precision with language was something he did professionally, but not personally. "I would like your grandmother's contact information. With her permission, I would like to discuss your living situation." Amara looked at the envelopes, looked at him. "My living situation," she repeated. "You're 10 years old, selling flowers on a sidewalk in October to help pay utility bills." The way he said it wasn't pity, it was something flatter and harder than pity, like a fact being read from a document that shouldn't exist. "How do you know about the utility bills?" "I know a great deal about you now, Amara." He paused. "I know your mother died 14 months ago. I know your father is not in the picture. I know your grandmother receives a fixed income that does not cover everything it needs to cover. I know you have been on that sidewalk since June of last year, and in that time you have spoken to exactly 9 of my employees, 4 of whom now regret not listening more carefully." She absorbed all of this. The coffee was still warm in her hands. "You had people look into my life." "Yes." "Last night." "Yes." She should have been angry. She tried to locate the anger and found something more complicated underneath it. Not gratitude exactly, but something adjacent to it that she didn't have a clean name for. The feeling of being seen by someone who was used to looking past things. "My grandmother's name is Agnes," she said. "She'll want to meet you before she agrees to anything." "That's reasonable. And she'll have questions. A lot of them. She doesn't trust people quickly." "Neither do I." Amara looked at him across the table. This man who had spent 14 months with a traitor in his inner circle and had not known it, who had walked past her on a sidewalk for 11 months and had not seen her, who was now sitting across a table from a 10-year-old and conducting himself with a formality that might have been ridiculous in any other context and somehow wasn't, and she thought, he's telling the truth. She didn't know why she was sure. She just was. "Okay," she said. "I'll give you her number." She was reaching for her cracked screen phone when Sung-jin moved from his position near the elevator and said, very quietly, "Sir." Taehyun looked at him. Sung-jin said something in Korean. Taehyun's expression didn't change, but the room changed. The quality of the air changed. His hands, which had been resting on the table, moved to his thighs, and he straightened almost imperceptibly, the way a man straightens when something has just become worse. "What is it?" Amara said. Neither man answered her immediately. "What is it?" she said again, and her voice was steadier than she felt. Taehyun looked at her. The debt-measuring look again, but with something new in it now, something that looked almost like an apology, coming from a man who did not apologize. "Petrov," he said. She waited. "He was not trying to flee last night." Taehyun held her gaze. "He was retrieving something from his vehicle." The room was very quiet. "They know who you are," he said. "They identified you last night. Petrov has been outside your building since 6 this morning." The coffee cup was still warm in her hands. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She thought about her grandmother. 4'11", a bad hip. Home alone right now, probably making tea, probably watching her program, with no idea that the man parked outside her building had been sitting there since before the coffee cup hit the table. Not hard. Amara set it down with both hands, carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have started shaking and you don't want anyone to see. But it landed with a sound that was too loud for the quiet room, and the coffee sloshed against the rim, and she pressed her palms flat against the table surface and looked at Taehyun and said, "My grandmother is alone." "I know." "She doesn't know anything about last night. I didn't tell her everything." "I know that too." She was already standing. Her chair made a sound against the floor. "I need to call her. Right now. I need Sung-jin." Taehyun said the name without raising his voice. Sung-jin was already on his phone, moving toward the window, speaking low and fast in Korean. He held up 2 fingers without turning around. I have 2 men 2 blocks from your building, Taehyun said. They're moving now. 2 blocks is 2 blocks. She heard her own voice, tight, controlled, the voice she used when she was most afraid, which was the opposite of how most people sounded when they were afraid. Her mother had been the same way. Agnes had told her that once. Your mother got quieter the worse things got. I always knew it was serious when she stopped talking. 2 blocks is 3 minutes on foot if they're running. What floor is Petrov on? He's in a vehicle, street level. You said he's been there since 6. It's 9:15. That's 3 hours and 15 minutes he's had to... She stopped. Made herself stop. Running the math wasn't helping. Is he alone? Taehyun looked at Sung-jin. Sung-jin said something. Taehyun's jaw moved. We don't know yet. She picked up her phone, 11%, the number somehow obscene in its smallness, and called her grandmother. 3 rings, 4. Her thumbnail pressed white against the cracked screen. 5. Amara. Agnes's voice slightly irritated in the way of someone interrupted mid-task. I'm making breakfast. You don't need to... Nana, I need you to listen to me. I need you to go to Mrs. Patterson's apartment right now. A pause. What? Mrs. Patterson on the 2nd floor. Go there now and wait for me to call you back. Don't open the front door of the building for anyone you don't know. Don't stop in the lobby. Amara Jean Brooks, what is going on? Please, Nana. The word came out smaller than she intended. She heard it land and watched Taehyun watch her hear it. Please just go. I'll explain everything. Mrs. Patterson's door, 2nd floor. Go now and call me when you're there. A long pause. Agnes was not a woman who moved on other people's urgency without understanding why, and in any other circumstance Amara would have respected that. Right now she counted the seconds. I'm going, Agnes said, and hung up. Amara lowered the phone. Her hands had stopped shaking, which was either good or deeply concerning. How do they know who I am? She said. Taehyun had stood at some point without her noticing. He was back at the window looking at the street below. His hands were clasped behind his back. The hotel has exterior cameras that cover the sidewalk, he said. Victor's people had access to the security feeds for at least 8 months. 8 months of footage. 8 months of her face, her buckets, her routine. So they've known who I was since before last night. They knew you existed. They wouldn't have considered you a factor. A pause. Until you became one. She processed this. Petrov saw me approach you. Yes, and he saw your reaction. She was thinking out loud now, the same way she worked through problems at school, following the logic wherever it ran. He knew the plan was exposed before anyone else reacted. That's why he stayed. Not to run, not to fight, to document. Taehyun turned from the window and looked at her with an expression she couldn't name, like something had just confirmed something else. The phone, she said, the one he pulled from his jacket. He wasn't checking messages, he was taking pictures. Of you, Taehyun said. Of your face. Close enough for a facial match. The room was very still. And then he walked into the alley, she said, and sent them to whoever needed them, and drove to my building. She sat back down, not because she wanted to, but because the logic of all this had weight, and the weight needed to go somewhere. They don't want me as a target. I'm 10. I'm not a threat. She worked it through. They want leverage. Taehyun said nothing. They're going to use my grandmother to control what I say. To the police, to the press. If I recant, if I say I misunderstood, that I was mistaken about what I heard, Victor's legal team has already filed preliminary motions, Taehyun said. The primary argument is that a single witness, a minor, not a native Russian speaker who was not verified on scene, is insufficient to establish, I am a native speaker. The words came out flat and final. My mother spoke to me in Russian every day of my life until she died. I am more fluent in Russian than most adults in this city. I know that. Victor's lawyers don't care about that. No, they don't. She looked at the 2 envelopes still on the table. She hadn't touched them. They looked strange to her now, like objects from a different version of this morning, one where the problem was simple and the solution was money. If Petrov does anything to my grandmother, she said, and stopped, and started again. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen to her. Taehyun's voice was different when he said it, not softer, harder. The hardness of a statement rather than a comfort. I have people at your building. You had Victor for 14 months. The silence that followed was total. She hadn't meant it as an attack. Or maybe she had, a little. Either way, it was true, and they both knew it, and the knowledge sat between them on the table like a third object beside the two envelopes. Tae-hyun didn't flinch. She'd give him that. He absorbed it the way he seemed to absorb most things, without visible reaction, though something behind his eyes shifted. Yes, he said. I did. Her phone buzzed. She answered before the first ring finished. Agnes's voice slightly breathless, slightly annoyed, the annoyance her grandmother used as armor over everything else. I'm at Dorothy's. She's made me sit down and she's asking questions I can't answer because you haven't told me anything. I'll explain everything soon. Don't leave until I say it's okay. A beat. Is the hallway quiet? It's 9 in the morning. What do you expect? Okay. Stay there? She hesitated. I love you. Agnes was quiet for a second, just a second, the way she got when sentiment arrived without warning. I know you do, she said. Now tell me what you've gotten yourself into. Soon, Nana. She hung up. Sung-jin came back from the window, phone lowered. He looked at Tae-hyun and said 2 words in Korean. Tae-hyun's shoulders moved, barely. A kind of internal compression. What? Amara said. Petrov is gone. Tae-hyun said it to the room, not to her specifically, but she was the one who needed to hear it. He moved the vehicle approximately 6 minutes ago. We don't have a current location. Your men. They reached the block. The vehicle was already gone. She looked at the window. October Chicago outside, gray and flat. The street below moving at its own indifferent pace. Someone down there was walking a dog. Someone was carrying coffee. The city had no idea. He already got what he needed, she said. The pictures. The location of my building? He's not waiting around to get picked up. She rubbed her eyes with 2 fingers. She was very tired, and the day was not yet 10 o'clock. He's reporting back, planning the next move. Tae-hyun sat down across from her again. I want to move you and your grandmother, he said. Today. Somewhere my people can cover properly. To where? I have a property. Your properties, she said, are things Victor had 14 months of intelligence on. The words landed. She watched them land. Tae-hyun leaned back in the chair. He looked at her for a long time. The overhead light was fluorescent and flat, and made everyone look like a fact rather than a person, and in it she could see how old he was. Not in years, but in the specific way that certain kinds of life aged you. Not decay, sediment. You're right, he said. So your safe houses aren't safe. Not all of them? How do you know which ones Victor didn't compromise? I don't. Not yet. We're still auditing. That could take days. Yes. She looked at the 2 envelopes again. Then she looked at Sung-jin, who had been standing near the elevator for the last several minutes, with the careful stillness of a man who was pretending to be furniture but was in fact processing everything. She looked back at Tae-hyun. Is there anyone in your organization you're completely certain about? Tae-hyun glanced at Sung-jin. 2 people, he said. Who? He looked at her steadily. Sung-jin. And my driver, James, the one who brought you here. James is the only person outside this room who knows this location right now? And the 2 men near your building, but they're outer security and I cannot yet... He stopped. Cannot yet verify, she finished. He nodded. She pressed her thumb against the crack in her phone screen, tracing it. The crack ran from the upper left corner diagonally down through the center and stopped just before the home button, and she'd traced it so many times in the last 14 months that the motion was unconscious. There's a woman, she said slowly. Her name is Dara Osei. She runs a community resource office on 63rd Street. She was my mother's friend. She has a room in the back of the office where people in trouble sometimes stay. She paused. Nobody in your organization knows her. Nobody in Victor's network has any reason to know she exists. Tae-hyun was quiet, She'll take my grandmother in, Amara continued. No questions. I've stayed there before, after my mother died, for 2 weeks while we sorted out the situation with the apartment. She doesn't talk to people she doesn't know, and she doesn't owe anyone anything. I don't know this person. That's the point. He looked at her for a long time. The look was not the debt-measuring one now. It was something more purely evaluative. The look, she thought, of a man who was used to being the one who planned and was currently confronting the fact that he was not the one best positioned to plan. I'll send Sung Jin with you, he said. One person, fine. She stood up. We need to go now. Amara. She stopped. What I said before about Victor, about the 14 months. He chose the words carefully again, that slightly unfamiliar precision. You were right to say it. My negligence created this situation. I want you to understand that I am aware of that. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to forgive it, he said. I'm telling you that the debt runs in one direction only, and that it runs from me to you, not the other way around. Whatever happens today, your safety, your grandmother's safety, that is my responsibility. Not a favor, not a transaction. She picked up the good coat, the navy one with the functioning zipper, and put it on. I know, she said. And then, because she was 10 and tired and the morning had been too much, and something about his face in that moment looked like a man standing in the rubble of something he'd built badly. It's okay. You didn't know about me either. Most people don't. She walked to the elevator. Sung Jin fell in beside her. Behind her, she heard Tae Hyun say something low into his phone. His voice had changed again, back to the flat command register, the operational voice. She didn't look back. The elevator descended. Dara Ose was 53, Nigerian-American, with natural hair going silver at the temples, and the energy of a woman who had long ago decided that chaos was simply weather and you dressed for it accordingly. She ran the Southside Resource Collective out of a converted storefront on 63rd that looked, from outside, like nothing in particular. Inside it was organized with the specific efficiency of a person who had spent decades making limited resources do unlimited work. Filing cabinets labeled in 3 colors, a coffee station that was always running, a corkboard with 40 things pinned to it, and a clear system for all 40. When Amara walked in with Sung Jin behind her, Dara looked at the man in the suit, then at Amara, then at the suit again. Who's this? She said. He works for someone I helped last night. There's a situation. Dara looked at Sung Jin for another full second. He looked back without flinching. She turned back to Amara. Your grandmother? She needs to be somewhere safe for a few days, maybe less. I don't know yet. Is she hurt? No. Are you hurt? No. Dara looked at Sung Jin once more. He's staying. Outside, Amara said. On the street. Dara nodded once, the nod of a woman cataloging a new problem alongside the 17 she was already managing. I'll call Mabel from the church 2 blocks down. She has a car. We can have your grandmother here within the hour if she's willing to move. She'll be willing, Amara exhaled. She won't be happy, but she'll be willing. Dara put her hand briefly on Amara's shoulder. Not a hug, not sentimentality, just a point of contact, and picked up her phone. Sung Jin stepped back outside. Amara sat in the plastic chair nearest the door and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and tried to organize the information she had into something that had a shape. Victor in custody, but connected to the Vanek organization in Milwaukee, which meant the order didn't die with Victor's arrest. Petrov mobile and currently unlocated. Her grandmother's address compromised. Tae Hyun's safe house network partially or fully burned. And something else. Something she'd been circling without landing on it. She lowered her hands. The hotel security feed. 8 months of Victor having access to it. 8 months of watching Tae Hyun's patterns, his arrivals, his departures, his team. That was the assassination intelligence. That was the how of last night. But the Vanek organization hadn't just wanted to kill Tae Hyun. If they had had 8 months to do it in dozens of ways. The car bomb on a fixed schedule was theatrical, public. It was designed to send a message as much as eliminate a threat. Why now? Why this way? She pulled her phone out. 7% battery. She needed a charger and she needed it in the next 10 minutes, or she was going to lose the only line she had to anyone. Dara, she stood. Do you have a charger? Samsung port. Dara pointed at the coffee station without looking up from her call. She plugged in and sat back down and thought. Victor had been turned 14 months ago, the same month her mother died. That was coincidence. She wasn't the kind of person who attached meaning to timing. But the number had lodged in her because 14 months was specific. 14 months meant this wasn't opportunistic. Somebody in the Vanek organization had identified Victor and had invested serious time and resources in developing him. That required intelligence about Tae Hyun's inner circle that predated Victor's turning. Someone had pointed at Victor and said, that one, that's the one we can use, which meant there was something else. Something under Victor. She was still thinking about this when her phone buzzed at 9% recharged, and Sung Jin's voice came through with a different texture than it had had all morning, tight and careful in the way of a man editing himself in real time. Amara, I need you to stay inside. Don't come to the door. She stood up. What happened? There's a vehicle parked across the street, gray Tahoe. It was not here when we arrived. She looked at Dara, who had ended her call and was watching Amara's face with the focused attention of a woman who had learned to read rooms. Did you call Tae-hyun? Amara said into the phone. I'm trying to reach him. A pause. He's not answering. She felt the floor shift. Not literally. The way it shifted when the thing you thought was solid revealed itself as resting on something else. What do you mean he's not answering? His phone goes to voicemail. I have a secondary number. Also no answer. Sungjin's voice had gone very controlled. Too controlled. I've tried James as well. James? The driver. The one Tae-hyun had said he was certain about. You said there were two people, she said. You and James. Yes. If James isn't answering, I know. A short silence. I know what it means. She pressed her back against the wall beside the door and looked at Dara and at the corkboard with its 40 pinned items and at the gray October light coming through the front window. And she thought about a man named Petrov sitting in a gray Tahoe across the street from a building that nobody in Tae-hyun's organization had known about until she had named it herself, in a room with Tae-hyun and Sung Jin 45 minutes ago. One of them had told. She looked at her phone. Sung Jin's voice was still coming through it, saying her name, but she wasn't hearing it anymore because she was looking at the window and the gray Tahoe that had followed them here through the one person she had trusted with the location, and now she understood, fully and completely, with the specific cold clarity of someone who had just watched a door she thought was open lock itself from. The door she thought was open had locked itself from the inside. She understood it in the space of 3 seconds, standing against the wall with Sung Jin's voice still coming through the phone and the gray Tahoe sitting across the street like a fact she hadn't wanted to know. Sung Jin had been in the room when she named this place. Sung Jin and Tae-hyun and James. 3 people. Tae-hyun wasn't answering his phone. James wasn't answering his phone. The Tahoe was here. The math was ugly and it only ran one direction. She put the phone back to her ear. Sung Jin, I'm here. Are you still on the sidewalk in front of the building? Yes. Does the driver of the Tahoe know what you look like? A pause. Likely, yes. Then move away from the front. Go around to the east side of the building. There's an alley. It connects to 62nd Street. Wait there. Amara, I should be... You're a visible target on an open sidewalk. Move. She kept her voice flat. I'll come to you. She hung up before he could argue. Dara was already standing, arms crossed, watching her with the level focus of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know when a situation had changed categories. How many exits? Amara said. Front door, back door, through the storage room, and a fire door on the north side that sticks but opens. Dara said it without hesitation, like she'd cataloged the building's geometry a long time ago for exactly this kind of morning. The back door opens to the alley. Is there anyone else in the building? My assistant Marcus comes in at 10. It's 9:42. Call him. Tell him to stay away today. Dara was already dialing. Amara looked at the front window. The Tahoe hadn't moved. She could see the silhouette of at least one person inside, but the October glare off the glass made detail impossible. She counted what she knew, Petrov, who had photographed her last night and driven to her building this morning. At least one vehicle. Sung Jin outside but compromised in position. Tae-hyun and James unreachable. She thought about Sung Jin. She had been about to classify him as the leak, the arithmetic pointing directly at him, but arithmetic could be constructed. If someone had wanted to frame Sung Jin, feeding the Tahoe's location timing to make it look like his call had guided them here, they could have done it. Petrov had known her face since last night. He had known the building on Wentworth by 6 this morning. If he'd had a shadow team, if they had been following the car that brought her to the north side building. Not because Sung Jin told them, but because they were already on her. She pressed her thumb against the crack in her phone screen. It was possible. She didn't know. She moved to the back of the office. The storage room smelled of cardboard and toner and old paper, and the back door had a deadbolt and a chain, and she undid both quietly and cracked it 2 inches and looked at the alley. Empty. Morning light, gray and flat, a dumpster, the back wall of the building across. No vehicles. No silhouettes. She texted Sung Jin, East Alley, come to the back. His reply came in 11 seconds, moving. She watched the door. 40 seconds later, she heard footsteps. One set, measured, not running. And Sung Jin appeared at the alley entrance, and she watched him walk the full length of the alley without looking behind him or to the sides, which either meant he was certain there was no one following or meant he already knew there wasn't because he was the one who had called them. She couldn't decide. She opened the door. He stepped inside. His face was professionally neutral, but his breathing was elevated. Not much, just enough that she could see his chest moving faster than normal. He looked at her, then past her at Dara, then back. The vehicle hasn't moved, he said. I know, we're not going out the front. She looked at him steadily. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it straight. His jaw tightened. You think I told them? Did you? The storage room was very small, and the single overhead bulb made everything look like an interrogation, and she held his gaze without blinking. He held hers. No, he said. Taehyun isn't answering. I know. James isn't answering. I know that too. Those are the only two people you said he trusted completely. Yes. Something moved across Sung Jin's face that was not professional neutrality, something older and heavier than that. James has worked for Taehyun for 9 years. If James turned, he stopped, started again. Victor was the outer ring. If the Vanek organization had someone deeper than Victor, James is his driver, Amara said. James knows every location, every route, every address. The word James sat in the room like a stone that had been dropped. Sung Jin took out his phone. His hands were steady. He pulled up something and turned the screen toward her. A map, a blue dot, moving. Taehyun's phone. I have a shadow track on all principal devices. He watched the dot. He's on the expressway, north, moving fast. He's in a car. Yes. Is he driving it? Sung Jin's expression answered that before his words did. The movement pattern is consistent with highway speed. There's no stop-start. He's not in control of the vehicle. She felt the cold move up her spine. They have him. They may have had him since before we left the building. She thought about Taehyun at the window on the 4th floor, the carefully chosen words, the 2 envelopes on the table. She thought about him saying the debt runs from me to you with the specific flatness of a man who meant what he said and was not used to saying it. She thought about him trusting James for 9 years. Where's the track going? She said. Sung Jin watched the dot. Industrial corridor, north of the city. There's a warehouse complex the Vanek organization is known to operate out of. You know where it is? I know of it. I've never been there. But you know the address? Yes. She looked at him. He looked at her. The storage room smelled of cardboard, and the bulb buzzed faintly, and outside on 63rd Street, a gray Tahoe sat in front of a building that someone had led it to, and Kang Tae-hyun was on a highway moving north at speed in a vehicle he wasn't controlling. Call the police, she said. Sung Jin's face did something. If I call the police and I'm wrong about where he is, impam amici amakis. Call them. Give them the track data. Give them the Vanek warehouse address. She held his gaze. If you're the one who told them about this building, calling the police is the last thing you do right now, so call them. A long moment. He held the phone. Then he dialed. She turned back to Dara while he talked. Is your car in the alley? Around the corner, 62nd Street. I need you to take me somewhere. Dara looked at her with the expression of a woman doing a rapid and serious calculation. Where? North. Industrial corridor. She paused. You don't have to. I can find another way. You're 10 years old and the only other option you have is a man you're not sure you trust. Dara uncrossed her arms. I'll get my keys. Ducked. They went out the north fire door that stuck and opened, Sung Jin first, then Amara, then Dara, pulling the door shut behind her. The Tahoe was on the south-facing street and the north exit put them in a different alley entirely, and they moved fast and low the 20 yards to 62nd Street, and Dara's 10-year-old Civic that was gray and unremarkable and smelled of dry erase markers. Sung Jin sat in the front. Amara sat in the back. Dara drove without being told twice about anything. Sung Jin had the phone tracker on the dashboard, the blue dot still moving north, slowing now. He stopped, he said, or close to it. The dot's decelerating. How far? 22 minutes if we push it. Dara pushed it. The city thinned as they moved north. Fewer storefronts, more chain link, more flat gray industrial sprawl. The buildings got lower and wider, and the spaces between them grew. Amara watched it pass through the window and tried to keep her thinking clean and sequential because the alternative was a kind of spiraling that wouldn't help anyone. Taehyun was being moved. Victor was in custody but connected to Vanek, and Vanek's people were operational without him. They had Taehyun, and they had known exactly where to take him, which meant James, 9 years, the most trusted, had given them the network geography they needed to operate in his city without getting lost. She thought about the car bomb last night. Theatrical, public, designed to send a message. If the car bomb had succeeded, the message was, Kang Tae-hyun is gone. His organization is open. If the car bomb failed, and they had always known it might fail, which is why Korlov and Demir were across the street, which is why Petrov stayed behind instead of running, then the backup plan had been in place for 14 months, too. The car bomb was the opening move. The real plan was capture. They didn't want him dead. Or not just dead. They wanted something from him first. She said it aloud. They want information. Sungjin half turned in the front seat. If they wanted him dead, they had 8 months of his schedule, she said. They could have done it 100 different ways. The car bomb was visible, loud. It was designed to either kill him publicly or fail, force him into motion, get him moving and vulnerable and trusting the wrong person. She pressed her palm against the window glass. Cold. James is the one who moves him. James is the one who drove him away from the building this morning after we left. Into a controlled vehicle, Sungjin said quietly. Yes. She watched the industrial landscape move past. What do they want from him? What does Vanek need badly enough to build a 14-month operation for? Sungjin was quiet for a moment, then, access codes. Taehyun controls 7 financial transit channels in the Midwest corridor. Legitimate front companies, but they process other things underneath. If Vanek got those codes, they could absorb his entire network infrastructure without firing another shot. And if he gives them the codes, his organization dissolves from the inside. His people, his assets, his operations, all of it rerouted to Vanek, without a fight. She stared at the dot on the screen. It had stopped. He won't give them the codes, she said. No, Sungjin agreed. He won't. The silence that followed had a specific weight to it. Then they'll hurt him until they have another option, she said. Dara's hands tightened on the wheel. She said nothing. She drove. The warehouse complex appeared on the right side of the expressway exit. 3 large connected structures behind a perimeter fence, with a private access road and a gate that was currently open. No visible signage. 3 vehicles in the lot that she could see from the road, one of them black, one of them a dark SUV, and one of them the kind of nondescript cargo van that was either delivering something legitimate or absolutely was not. Dara rolled past without slowing. I'm not stopping in front of that. No, keep going, 2 blocks north. She pulled over on a residential street that had wandered into the industrial zone the way streets sometimes did. 3 houses between 2 warehouses, looking confused about their own existence. Dara killed the engine. Police are 8 minutes out, Sungjin said, looking at his phone. They took the track data. They're treating it as a credible threat. 8 minutes. Yes. She looked at the warehouse through the rear window. 2 blocks. The fence was chain link, 8 feet, topped with wire but not electrified as far as she could see. The access road was the only vehicle entry, but the fence ran along the side of the building, and there was a section nearest the north face where a drainage ditch ran underneath. She'd seen it from the car, a gap in the fence line where water erosion had lifted the bottom panel. She was 10 years old. She was the smallest person in this car. She was, in terms of the threat she presented to any adult male in that facility, functionally invisible. This was the only advantage she had, and she was going to use it. She already had her hand on the door. Amara, Sungjin's voice. I'm not going inside. I just need to see. You're not leaving this car. In this. She looked at him. He looked at her. 2 blocks away, in a building behind chain link and wire, a man who had looked at her across a table and said the debt runs from me to you was in a room with people who needed something from him and would not ask for it gently. He came to your sidewalk every week, Sungjin said. Not a persuasion, a fact. delivered quietly. For 3 years before you started working there. He built that hotel. He never once looked at you. I know. He looked at you last night. I know that too. She held his gaze. 8 minutes, she said. The police are 8 minutes out. Someone needs to confirm he's in there so the police don't arrive at an empty building with bad coordinates and lose 12 minutes recalibrating. She kept her voice level. I'm small. I'm quiet. I know what a drainage ditch looks like from a car window. And I have 7 years of following my mother through the south side at night when the building's lights were out. She paused. You have an injured principal, an unknown number of hostiles, an offense you can't scale quietly. I have none of those problems. Sungjin looked at her for a long moment. You go to the fence line, he said. You look. You do not cross the fence. You do not make a sound. You see what you can see, and you come back to this car and you tell me. Yes. If anything moves toward you, you run. You don't think about it. You run. Yes. He reached into his jacket and took out his phone, the one with the tracker, the one with the police contact, and held it out to her. Keep this. If something happens, press the green call button. It redials the last number. She took it. 2 blocks, he said. You go along the drainage side, not the road. Stay low. She opened the door. The air outside was cold and smelled of rust and standing water, and the particular emptiness of industrial zones on weekday mornings. She pulled the good coat around her and moved along the edge of the road, where the gravel shoulder met the ditch, staying below the sight line of the fence. The drainage gap was where she'd seen it. A 2-foot clearance between the bottom of the fence panel and the ground, the chain link lifted and bent by years of water. Large enough for a 10-year-old girl to slide through without making a sound. Not large enough for an adult. She pressed herself flat against the cold ground at the base of the fence and looked through it. The warehouse lot was quieter than she'd expected. One man near the cargo van, smoking, facing away from her. The side door of the main warehouse was propped open with a concrete block. Light inside, but artificial, cold, fluorescent. She could hear voices, not the words, too far, too muffled, but the register. 2 distinct voices, lower and controlled. And underneath them, intermittent, a third voice that was different in texture. Strained, the specific sound of a voice that was working hard to stay flat and wasn't entirely succeeding. She knew that voice. She had heard it for 45 minutes that morning across a table with 2 envelopes and a coffee tray. She pulled out Sungjin's phone, pressed the green call button. When the line connected, she didn't wait for the voice on the other end. He's here, she said. Main warehouse, side entrance, propped door on the north face. 1 visible guard near a gray van, south side of the lot. The access road gate is open. A pause. He's alive. He's talking. You need to move now. She started to pull back from the fence. The guard near the van turned around. He was looking directly at her. For 1 second, 1 full, crystalline, unforgiving second, they looked at each other across 40 feet of cracked concrete and gray morning air, and she saw his hand drop to his side and his body shift from idle to something entirely. She ran. Not away from the fence, toward it. Back through the drainage gap, the cold ground scraping her palms. The chain link catching the hem of the good coat for 1 terrible second before she yanked free and rolled to her feet on the gravel shoulder and ran along the ditch line the way she'd come, low and fast, her breath coming in hard white puffs in the October air. Behind her, she heard the man shout. 1 word, Russian, a name. Petrov's, she thought. Or maybe a command, it didn't matter. And then the sound of boots on gravel moving toward the fence and the metallic shudder of chain link as he hit it at speed. She didn't look back. The fence was 8 feet. The wire at the top was there. He'd need 10 seconds minimum to get over it, and that was 10 seconds she intended to use completely. She ran the 2 blocks on pure instinct, legs driving, arms pumping, the Civic's gray shape resolving out of the morning murk ahead of her. Sungjin was already out of the passenger door before she reached it. He'd heard the shout, she realized, or he'd been watching. And he caught her by the shoulders as she came in, and she grabbed his arm and said, breathing hard, "He's moving! Fence, north side, 30 seconds. Sungjin looked past her. His hand moved to his jacket. "Don't," she said. "Police are coming. Don't make this something else." His hand stopped. From behind them, from the direction of the fence, she heard the guard hit the ground on the outside. Then footsteps. Running. Dara started the car. The footsteps were close, and then they weren't. She heard them change direction, heard the guard make a decision that wasn't them. And when she looked back from the Civic's rear window, the man was running toward the warehouse's access road gate, not toward the car, and she understood. He wasn't coming for her. He was going inside. He was warning them. "Drive," Sungjin said. Dara drove, not away, north, around the block, parallel to the warehouse's far side, because there was only one exit road, and if she drove south toward the expressway, she'd be driving toward where the police were coming from, and that was exactly where she wanted to be. Sungjin was on the phone. Units approaching from the south on the access road, one hostile on foot inside the perimeter. Principal is alive, main warehouse, north face entrance. He listened. 2 minutes? Confirmed. He lowered the phone. 2 minutes. She sat in the back seat of Dara's Civic with her scraped palms pressed against her thighs and her pulse in her ears, and she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her when things got loud. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her hands were bleeding a little. Not badly. She hadn't noticed until just now. "You're hurt," Dara said from the front seat without looking back. "Fence, I'm fine." "You're not fine, your hands are bleeding." "Later," Amara said. 2 minutes was 2 minutes. She was going to use them breathing. The police arrived in 3 units, 2 marked, 1 unmarked, and hit the access road at speed with lights going, and she watched from the Civic parked half a block north as the vehicles disappeared through the gate she'd been looking through 4 minutes ago. Sungjin was on the phone with someone, tracking the blue dot that had stopped moving, confirming the location to the responding units. For 11 minutes, she sat in the backseat of Dara's Civic and watched the fence line and breathed and said nothing. Then more units arrived. Then an ambulance. Then a black vehicle she didn't recognize that moved with the deliberate authority of something that didn't need sirens. Then Sungjin exhaled, just once, short, controlled, and looked at his phone screen and lowered it to his knee. "They have him," he said. She closed her eyes. Not relief. Not yet. Something earlier than relief. The cessation of a particular kind of tension. The letting go of the breath you'd been holding so long, you'd stopped knowing you were holding it. She sat with it for a moment, just sat with it, the cold in the car and Dara's hands on the wheel, and the distant sound of more sirens converging on a warehouse 2 blocks away. "Is he hurt?" she said. "They're assessing." A pause. He was conscious when they reached him. She opened her eyes. "James," she said. Sungjin's jaw moved. "In custody. He was on site." A pause that had a lot of weight in it. He'd been with Taehyun for 9 years. She thought about Taehyun saying 2 people with the certainty of a man who had checked his math. She thought about how certainty was not the same as correctness, and how the gap between the two was where most damage happened. "Is there anything left to do right now," she said, "that I need to be here for?" Sungjin looked at her. "Because my grandmother is at Dara's office and she's been sitting in a back room since 8:30, and she has a bad hip, and she doesn't know what's happening, and she's been very patient." She kept her voice even. "I'd like to go back to her." Sungjin looked at her for another moment. Then he turned to Dara. "Can you take her back?" Dara had already put the car in drive. Agnes Brooks did not cry when Amara walked through the door of the Resource Collective and sat down across from her at the folding table in the back room. She looked at Amara's hands, the scraped palms, the dried blood, the fence rash across the heel of her right hand, and she pressed her lips together, and she reached out and took both of Amara's hands in both of hers and held them. She didn't say anything for a while. Dorothy Patterson, who had been sitting in the corner with a cup of tea and the good manners not to ask questions, quietly gathered her things and left. "Tell me," Agnes said. Amara told her. All of it. From the moment she'd heard the Russian voices at the silver sedan through the past 4 hours of moving and hiding and chain link and scraped palms. She told it the way she told most things, in order, without dramatizing, leaving nothing out because leaving things out was something she didn't have patience for anymore. Her grandmother listened without interrupting, which was not her natural mode. She listened with the specific quality of attention of someone who was containing their own reaction by force of will in order to hear the information first. When it was over, Agnes held her granddaughter's damaged hands and looked at the middle distance for a long time. "You went to the fence," she said. "Yes." "When the man was there." "Yes." Agnes breathed in through her nose. "Your mother," she said, and then stopped, and then started again. Your mother would have done exactly the same thing, and I would have been just as furious at her. Amara looked at her grandmother's hands around hers. The knuckles were large and the skin was thin, and the grip was the same grip it had always been. The grip of a woman who had held on to things through decades that tried to take them. I'm okay, Nana. I know you're okay. I can see you're okay. Agnes pressed her lips together again. That's not the point. Dara came in from the main office with a first aid kit and set it on the table without comment, pulled a chair up, and began cleaning the heel of Amara's right hand with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times in this room for many different people in many different difficult mornings. Agnes watched. The man, she said. Kang. He's going to be okay, Amara said. I think. You think. He was conscious when they found him. Agnes nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing information rather than accepting it. He wants to help us, Amara said. He said so. Men in his position say a lot of things. I know. You trusted him anyway. Amara looked at her hands while Dara worked. I trusted that he was telling the truth about being in debt. People who are used to owing nobody. When they finally admit they owe someone, they mean it. They don't know how to say it otherwise. Agnes looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. When did you get so old? She said. It wasn't really a question. Amara didn't answer it. Sat, Taehyun was in a private medical facility on the North Shore for 4 days. She didn't visit. She'd thought about it and decided against it, not from reluctance, but from the instinct that certain things needed space and time before they were real, and that a hospital room in the aftermath of what had happened to him was not the right container for whatever the next conversation between them would be. She sent a message through Sung Jin. 2 sentences. I hope you recover quickly. My grandmother wants to meet you when you're ready. She received in return a message of 4 sentences in careful English that Sung Jin read to her over the phone because she'd asked him to. I was informed you approached the fence. That was not part of the agreement. I would have been very angry if it had gone differently. I am grateful it did not. She almost smiled at the 4th sentence. Almost. She went back to selling flowers on the sidewalk outside the Hanseong Grand on the 3rd day after, because the bills were what they were, and November was coming, and the carnations wouldn't sell themselves. Hector was back on the door. He came down from the entrance during a quiet stretch in the mid-afternoon and stood beside her buckets and looked at her without saying anything for a moment. Heard what you did, he said. People keep saying that, because people keep being impressed by it. She handed him a bunch of yellow freesias. For your wife. He took them. She'll like these. He looked at the hotel entrance, then back at her. You know he's coming back Thursday. I know. Things might be different with how people treat you out here. She looked at the buckets. The carnations were fresh this week. She'd found a better supplier, a woman on the far south side who grew them herself in a greenhouse and sold them cheap if you showed up early enough. They were good carnations, pink and white, and still tight at the petals, not a curl of dyeing anywhere. Things were fine before, she said. Hector looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once, the nod of someone who knew better than to argue with a true thing, and went back to the door. Taehyun came back on Thursday. She was in her usual spot when the black SUV came around the corner. Not the Mercedes, which was presumably still in an evidence facility somewhere, but a different vehicle, a Suburban with different plates and a different driver. 2 men swept the entrance. One of them was a face she recognized from the inner security detail. The other she didn't know. Both of them were careful in a new way, a way that had learned something. He came through the hotel doors at 5:47, a little slower than usual. The left side of his walk was slightly different. She'd read about the ribs in the brief account that had made it into the news cycle, 2 fractured, treated, and released. He moved like a man who was paying attention to something inside his own body and choosing not to let it show on the outside. He stopped in front of her flower buckets. She stood. He looked at her. She looked at him. The late afternoon October light came down between the buildings at a low angle and lit the side of his face and made him look for a moment like someone from a different kind of story. He had a cut above his left eyebrow, nearly healed, butterfly stitched. His eyes were the same as they'd always been, closed, careful, assessing. except that something behind them had shifted in a way she couldn't name precisely but recognized. He had been a person who walked through rooms without being touched by them. He was still that person. But the room had touched him this time, and he knew it. "Your grandmother," he said. "She's ready to meet you. Saturday, if that works. She wants it at our apartment." He considered this. The apartment on South Wentworth with the cracked front step and the window unit that rattled. The idea of Kang Tae-hyun sitting on their second-hand furniture drinking Agnes Brooks's coffee was almost too large to hold in the mind all at once. But she held it. "Saturday," he said. "What time?" 2:00. She makes lunch." Something moved across his face. Something too quick and controlled to name. "I'll be there." He looked at the carnations. "How much?" he said. $3. He reached into his jacket, slowly, she noticed, protecting the left side, and placed a 20 on the rim of the bucket. "Keep the change." She looked at the 20, looked at him. "My flowers are worth $3, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then something happened that she hadn't expected and wouldn't have predicted. The right corner of his mouth moved just slightly, in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but was the shadow of where a smile might eventually be. He took the carnations, the pink ones, the tight ones, the good ones, and he walked toward the hotel entrance, and she watched him go. Saturday arrived gray and cold, and the radiator in the apartment made its clunking sound every 20 minutes with the regularity of a bad clock. Agnes had made doenjang jjigae from a recipe she'd found online at 11 o'clock the night before, because she'd asked Amara what Korean people ate when they were guests somewhere, and Amara had said she didn't know, and Agnes had said, "Then I'll find out." And the apartment smelled of fermented soybean and tofu and the particular warmth of a kitchen working hard. Taehyun arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. Sungjin was with him. Agnes had been told there would be two, and they stood in the doorway of the apartment on South Wentworth, and Amara watched Taehyun look at the space. The water ring stains on the ceiling, the window unit, the 12-inch TV with the antenna that needed repositioning, the photographs on the wall that included a woman who had Amara's eyes and her mother's name written underneath in Agnes's careful handwriting. He looked at that photograph for 2 seconds longer than everything else. Agnes came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and looked at Taehyun with the direct, unimpressed assessment of a woman who had not spent 71 years refining her ability to read people only to stop using it now. "You're taller than I expected," she said. "Mrs. Brooks." He held out the carnations. White ones this time, a full bunch, wrapped in brown paper. "Thank you for having us." Agnes took the flowers and looked at them and looked at him. "You know she charged you $3 for these." "I know." "She gave back your 20. "She did." Agnes considered this, then she stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. Lunch is ready. You can tell me what you intend to do about my granddaughter's situation while you eat." Taehyun stepped inside. He sat at their table, the second-hand table with the slightly uneven leg that Agnes had fixed with a folded piece of cardboard, and he ate Agnes's doenjang jjigae, and he told her what he intended to do. Not in the language of transaction, not in the language of men who were accustomed to offering terms. In the language, halting in places, of someone who had looked at a debt squarely and was trying to pay it in the right currency. A house. Something real, not temporary. A neighborhood with good schools. A trust fund that would cover education from now through university. No conditions. No strings. No expectation of access to Amara or Agnes in exchange. Agnes listened. She ate. She asked 3 questions, each one precise as a needle, about the legal structure of the trust and who held oversight and what happened to it if something happened to him. He answered all 3 without hedging. When he was finished, Agnes put down her spoon and folded her hands on the table. "My granddaughter saved your life," she said. "Yes." "She did it because it was right, not because she expected anything back." "I know that. So what you're offering, this isn't a payment, it's not a transaction, it's not something she earned." Agnes held his gaze. "It's something you're doing because it's right, because you can, because the fact that a 10-year-old child has been standing on your sidewalk for a year in the cold to pay utility bills while you walked past her is something you want to correct." A long moment. "Yes," he said, "that's what it is." Agnes nodded, the slow, final nod of a verdict. "Then we'll talk to a lawyer," she said, and picked up her spoon, and the matter was settled. The house was in Bronzeville. 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a yard with 2 old oak trees that Agnes said reminded her of the yard she'd grown up in Mississippi, 60 years ago. It was 7 minutes from a school that Amara had already researched, and 2 blocks from a library branch that was open 6 days a week. They moved in on a Friday in November, first snow of the season coming down in thin flakes that hadn't decided whether to commit. Agnes stood in the kitchen and ran her hand along the counter twice and looked out the window at the backyard and said nothing for a long time. Amara stood beside her and looked at the same view. The yard, the oaks, the snow that was trying, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness exactly, something more structural than happiness. The feeling of a floor that held. She still sold flowers, not outside the Hansjong Grand. That chapter had ended the way chapters ended, not dramatically, but by simply not continuing. She sold them at a farmer's market on Saturday mornings, 3 blocks from the new house, where she had a regular spot and regular customers who knew her name and sometimes brought their kids to buy flowers for their mothers. She charged fair prices and kept honest inventory and came home with money in her pocket that didn't have to disappear into the electric bill. The trust fund existed. She knew it existed. She didn't look at the statements because she was 10, and the statements were not relevant to her yet. Someday they would be. That was enough. The criminal machinery that had nearly killed Taehyun ground through its processes in the months that followed. Viktor Mikhailov was indicted on multiple federal charges and entered a cooperation agreement that unraveled 3 separate organized crime networks across 4 states. James Choi, 9 years, the most trusted, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received a sentence that Amara read about briefly and then set aside, because the feeling she had about James Choi was not anger or satisfaction or any of the clean emotions. It was something more complicated and quieter. The understanding that people could be loyal for years and then be something else for reasons that had their own architecture, and that the architecture didn't always show on the outside. Petrov was arrested in Indiana 6 weeks after the warehouse, trying to cross into Canada through a route that hadn't accounted for the cooperation agreement Victor had already signed. He did not look like a dangerous man in the photograph the news used. He looked tired. Most dangerous things did, eventually. The Vanek organization's operations in the Midwest corridor were disrupted so thoroughly that the disruption made the Tribune in 3 separate stories across 2 months. Taehyun's name appeared in none of them. That was by design, and Amara understood it to be so without needing it explained. She saw him 6 times in the 4 months after the warehouse. Once at the lawyer's office when the trust documentation was finalized. Once when he came to see the Bronzeville house before they moved in. He walked through it once, said nothing, and left. And she understood that this was his way of seeing something through rather than an intrusion. Once at a school fundraiser that he attended because she'd mentioned the school in passing in one conversation, and he had written it down somewhere in the way that he did things, quietly and completely. Twice at the farmer's market, where he appeared without announcement and bought flowers, she charged him the same as anyone else, and he paid the right amount without commenting on it. The 6th time was in February. She was in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon, jacket on, working on homework at the outdoor table that Agnes had found at a garage sale and refinished herself. The math was calculus adjacent, a gifted program her new school had placed her in after a single assessment, and she was working through a problem that had a good shape to it, the kind of problem that rewarded patience. She heard the back gate. Taehyun came through it the way he came through most spaces, taking inventory before committing, and stopped when he saw her at the table. He looked at the homework, looked at her. "You're outside in February," he said. "I like the cold." She put down her pencil. "Sungjin lets you walk around alone now?" "Sungjin is in the car." "That's not alone." The right corner of his mouth moved again. "A little more than last time." "No, I suppose not." He stood at the edge of the yard near the oak trees with his hands in the pockets of his coat and looked at the yard. She looked at him looking at it. He had changed in ways she was still cataloging. The walk was fully recovered, the rib favoring gone, though she suspected it would be back in cold weather. Old fractures always were. The closed quality of his face was still there, but the density of it had altered, as if something that had been packed very tightly had been given slightly more room. He was not a warm man. She didn't think he would become one, but he was a man who had started to notice things that were in front of him, and that was different from what he had been. "The school program," he said. "How is it?" "Hard. Good." She picked up her pencil again. "The calculus is annoying me, which means I'll figure it out eventually." "Your grandmother." Likes the kitchen. Made me promise to learn how to cook in it. I'm working on it. He nodded, looked at the oak trees. I'm opening a community resource center, he said. On the south side, 63rd Street corridor. She looked up. Dara Ose has agreed to consult on the programming structure, he said. She was direct about what it needed to actually work rather than merely exist. A pause. I found that helpful. Amara thought about Dara and her corkboard with 40 items pinned to it and her coffee station that was always running. She thought about Dara not asking a single unnecessary question on a hard morning, just handing over a first aid kit and cleaning scraped palms with practiced efficiency. She'll make it good, Amar said. I believe that too. She looked at her homework. The problem was still there, waiting with its good shape. She looked back at Tae-hyun. Is that what you came to tell me? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I came to tell you that the center's name is going to be put to a public vote, he said. Among the community members who'll use it. He held her gaze. But I know what I would like it to be. She looked at him. She was 10 years old, and she had buried her mother and helped raise herself, and learned 2 languages in a cracked screen world, and stood on cold sidewalks with dying flowers, and run along drainage ditches in October, and pressed her scraped palms against a chain-link fence, and called in a location while a guard's eyes found her across 40 feet of empty concrete. She had not done any of it to be remembered. She had done it because someone was going to die, and she was the only person who knew, and walking away from that had never been a real option. Not for her, not in the body she lived in, not with the mother she'd had and the grandmother who was in the kitchen right now, probably reorganizing the spice shelf for the 3rd time because she was happy, and happiness made her industrious. That's your decision, she said. Not mine. Tae-hyun looked at her for a moment, the full, unguarded look that had first appeared on a hotel driveway in October, when a girl with a bucket of flowers had said words that reordered his world. And then he looked at the yard, at the oak trees, at the February sky that was white and flat and full of something not yet ready to come down. Yes, he said. I know. He stayed another 20 minutes. They talked about the calculus problem because she showed it to him to see if he'd engage with it, and he did. Not by solving it, but by asking the right question about it, the kind of question that made the shape of the problem clearer, which was more useful than a solution anyway. When he left, she listened to the back gate close. She picked up her pencil. The problem had a different shape now. Better. More solvable. She bent over the page and worked. Inside, Agnes was singing something low and wordless in the kitchen, the way she sang when she was content without wanting to announce it. The radiator knocked its patient knock. One of the oak trees moved in the February wind, its bare branches crossing and separating in the yard of a house that was theirs. Amara worked. The answer, when it came, was clean.